Welcome to the deep dive. We dissect complex topics, right? We pull out the important stuff for you.
That's right.
And today, we're going deep into the world of biosecurity.
Okay.
Specifically, there's this 2024 issue brief from CSET.
Uh-huh.
That's the Center for Security and Emerging Technology, in case you didn't know.
Right.
The title's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Anticipating Biological Risk, a Toolkit for Strategic Biosecurity Policy.
It is.
So this report, it's not your typical bioweapons thing.
It's much broader than that.
It's about pathogens and toxins across the board. Natural, accidental, weaponized, all of it.
It really takes a comprehensive look at biosecurity.
And to break it down, they dive into two scenarios. They sound like something out of a movie, honestly.
Yeah.
First, you've got a malicious actor creating and unleashing a bioweapon.
Okay, that's scenario one.
The second one, it's an unintentional lab accident,
Yeah.
during legitimate research.
So both sides of the coin, essentially.
Both pathways to harm.
Right. That's the key takeaway.
And the report, it actually visualizes this. There's a diagram, figure 1. Simplified view of pathways that result in biological harm from a pathogen or toxin. It basically breaks down the steps, how a biological event might unfold.
And that's regardless of the intent, whether it's deliberate or accidental.
Yeah, exactly.
This pathway is so important because it shows us where we can intervene, where we can step in and prevent harm.
It's like if you were thinking about how a burglar breaks into a house.
Okay, I'm following.
You could figure out where to put alarms, right?
Yeah.
Reinforce doors, maybe even install motion sensor lights.
So thinking about layers of protection, I like that analogy.
Now let's get into those scenarios.
Okay,
Let's
yeah.
start with the one that feels like a spy movie, a malicious actor.
All right, let's dive in.
So first question, what would even make someone consider bioweapons?
It's tough to say. Their motives could be all over the map.
Yeah.
The report talks about political goals, ideologies, revenge, even just wanting to create chaos.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is.
Let's say they've got their motivation. What's the next step in this pathway to harm?
They move into research planning, gathering info, designing their protocol.
Makes sense.
The scary part is how easy it is to get information.
Really?
Open source publications, online DIY bio communities, even tutorials online on video platforms.
Wow, that's unsettling. It's not as hard to find this stuff as you'd think.
It's one of the things the report really emphasizes. And then they need to figure out funding.
Acquire research funding.
Exactly. That's where you'd think it'd get tricky, right? Especially for someone acting alone.
Yeah, you'd think so. I mean, funding bioweapons research, that's got to raise red flags.
You would hope. But
Yeah.
they could get into illicit networks, maybe divert funds from legitimate sources,
Yeah.
even use less regulated channels like crowdfunding.
Crowdfunding bioweapons. That's wild.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've got the motive, the plan, the money. What's next?
The materials, of course.
Acquire materials.
The actual biological agents, the equipment, everything they need.
This has got to be the hard part, right? Getting your hands on dangerous pathogens.
Well, it's not as simple as just going to a store. But there are vulnerabilities, even beyond the traditional suppliers.
Like what?
Less regulated sources, online marketplaces, even gaps in the existing regulations.
It's like a whole underground market.
Kinda, yeah.
Okay, so they've got the stuff. Now what?
Now they have to actually work with it.
Physical handling is what the report calls it.
Right. Producing the agent, weaponizing it potentially.
It sounds complicated.
It is. It takes specialized knowledge, equipment, a controlled environment.
Like one of those biohazard labs you see in movies.
Well, those labs do exist, but they're heavily regulated, obviously.
Okay, they've made it this far. What's the final step?
Intentional deployment. This is where they decide how and where to attack.
So contaminating water supplies, releasing airborne pathogens, targeted attacks, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And the report highlights a chilling possibility. Using AI chatbots to help with this.
Chatbots.
They could be used to identify vulnerabilities, plan strategies, even spread misinformation.
So AI isn't creating bioweapons, but it could make them more sophisticated, harder to stop.
That's the concern. And it's not just hypothetical anymore. AI and biotech are advancing rapidly, and that's raising the stakes.
All right, so what can we do about this? How do we stop this kind of attack?
One thing the report suggests is strengthening biosurveillance and bioattribution. We need to be able to detect outbreaks quickly, identify them, and trace them back to their source.
So like a super advanced early warning system and a forensic investigation all rolled into one.
Exactly. If attackers know they'll be caught, that's a strong deterrent.
Right, back to that house analogy. But what about being proactive?
That's where law enforcement comes in. Intelligence agencies need to uncover these plots before they happen, disrupt the networks, arrest those involved.
So a combination of making attacks harder and making getting caught more likely.
Right. And it needs a lot of coordination, information sharing between different agencies.
This has been a really eye-opening look at biosecurity and these malicious actors.
It's just one side of the story, though. We
Yeah.
still need to consider the risks of those unintentional lab accidents.
Which we'll get into in the next part of this deep dive.
Exactly. It's kind of scary to think about, you know? But even when everyone means well, accidents still happen.
That's right.
And with dangerous pathogens in a lab, the consequences can be huge.
It's what makes this second scenario so interesting, but also a bit unnerving. We're shifting gears now,
Right.
moving from malicious intent to the risks that just come with doing science.
Inherent risks, yeah.
The report calls it unintentional laboratory accidents.
Yeah.
Even a small mistake can have huge consequences.
That's the thing. The same knowledge, the same resources that lead to these scientific breakthroughs, they can also lead to harm accidentally.
So you're saying a researcher working on a vaccine,
Uh-huh.
they could end up on a similar path as someone with bad intentions.
In the beginning, yes, they both start with an idea, a hypothesis.
Okay.
Then they plan the research, figure out the methods, and of course, get funding.
So it's the intent and what they do after that makes the difference,
Right. Understanding the whole pathway is key, no matter what the intent is.
whether it's deliberate or accidental.
Yeah, exactly. We need to see where things can go wrong so we can prevent it.
Finding those points of failure.
Exactly. Okay, so let's imagine our researcher. They've got their hypothesis, the funding, they're ready to go.
What's next? Acquire materials,
Mm-hmm.
right? Seems pretty straightforward for a lab.
You'd think so, right?
They have their ways of getting things?
But it's trickier than it looks.
How so?
Labs have strict protocols. They use regulated suppliers. But there are still vulnerabilities. Not everything's watched as closely as you'd think.
So even in a lab, there can be oversight gaps. I always thought they were super strict.
They are, but it's not perfect. Researchers, they might use different sources, and the regulations aren't always the same. And there's always the human factor.
People make mistakes.
Exactly. So let's say our researcher has their materials.
Okay.
Next step is actually working with the pathogens.
Physical handling.
Right. And that's where the risk of accidents really goes up.
I bet.
It's all about precision, strict safety protocols. A spill, a needle stick, a broken piece of equipment, even just a moment of not paying attention. Those can have serious consequences.
Like a surgeon operating. One wrong move.
Exactly. The stakes are incredibly high. The report talks about an accidental containment breach.
And those breaches, depending on what pathogen it is, that could be anything from a few people getting sick to a full-blown outbreak.
Right. And that's why we need to make labs safer.
What does the report suggest?
Yeah.
How do we make labs safer and prevent these accidents?
Well, they focus on a few key strategies. One is really focusing on best practices, making sure lab personnel are well trained,
Right.
having strict protocols for how they handle pathogens, and regular inspections to make sure everyone's following the rules.
So it's about creating a culture of safety in labs.
Yes, making sure everyone understands the risks and takes those protocols seriously. Another thing is institutional oversight. A lot of research institutions have what they call an Institutional Biosafety Committee, an IBC.
I've heard of those. They're like the safety watchdogs for the research, right?
Exactly. They look at research proposals, they assess the risks, and they basically make sure everything's being done safely and responsibly.
Okay.
The report says we need to give these committees the resources they need, funding, staff, authority, so they can actually be effective.
Makes sense. But here's a thought. We've been talking about labs in general.
Yeah.
But a lot of regulations, they focus on research that's federally funded,
Right.
right? What about private labs, independent researchers? Are they under the same rules?
That's a great point, and it's something the report addresses. There's definitely a gap in oversight when it comes to research that's not funded by the government.
So potentially, less oversight, less strict safety protocols.
That's a possibility, yeah. The report suggests we need standardized practices and oversight for all research, no matter who's funding it.
Because a breach, whether it's at a university or a private company, it can affect everyone. It's not just about the lab itself, it's about the potential global impact.
Exactly. And that brings us to another big piece of the puzzle. Artificial intelligence.
AI. That's been a hot topic lately,
Yeah.
and not always in a good way. I'm curious how it fits into all of this.
It's complicated and things are changing fast, but it's definitely something we need to pay attention to.
Okay.
We'll unpack all of that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, we talked about those malicious actors, right?
Yeah.
And those lab accidents, the unintentional ones.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time for the big one. AI.
AI.
Artificial intelligence and biosecurity.
It's a game changer, that's for sure. AI is impacting so many fields.
Absolutely.
And the life sciences, they're right at the forefront. It's a tool, a powerful one, but like any tool, it has risks.
It's like fire, right? You can cook with it, keep warm, but it can also burn everything down if you're not careful.
That's a good way to put it.
So how does this all connect to what we've been talking about, those scenarios?
Well, the report, it makes it clear. AI, it's not essential for making bioweapons or causing lab accidents.
Okay.
But it can have a big impact on both.
So it's not about AI taking over and becoming some evil mastermind.
Not quite.
It's more about how it could make existing risks worse or even create new ones.
Right. AI can speed up research, make designs more sophisticated, even automate some processes. So a researcher trying to do good or someone with bad intentions, they can both use AI to get to their goals faster, more efficiently.
That's what makes this so important. We need to figure out how to use AI for good, but also prevent the bad stuff.
Absolutely. So to see how AI fits into this whole pathway to harm thing, let's break it down by stages, starting with planning and design.
Okay.
That's where these AI tools, they can really make a difference.
I've heard about those. They can analyze tons of data, find patterns, even predict how changes to a pathogen might affect it.
Exactly. Think about a scientist developing a vaccine.
Okay.
AI tools can help them sift through mountains of data, find potential targets, figure out how effective it'll be, even design it better.
That's amazing.
But the flip side is, someone with bad intentions, they could use those same tools to make a pathogen more dangerous, more contagious.
So it's a double-edged sword. Amazing for medicine, but also potentially terrifying for bioweapons.
That's the dilemma. How do we manage that? How do we govern AI in this context?
It's a tough question. How do we balance the need for innovation with the need to prevent harm?
The report has some ideas. One big area is model safeguards. It's about building in protections right into the AI models themselves.
Like designing a car with airbags and seatbelts.
Exactly. They're there to minimize harm if something goes wrong.
Okay.
One way to do this is by filtering the data that the models learn from. Keep out information that could be used to create harmful things.
So we're trying to control what they learn so they can't be used for bad stuff.
Right. Another way is penalizing harmful outputs during training. So we're basically training them to avoid creating dangerous information.
But where do you draw the line? How do you define what's risky without limiting what the AI can do?
That's a big debate, a constant one in AI ethics. It's about finding that balance.
Right. We don't want to hold back progress, especially in medicine.
Exactly. Okay, beyond those safeguards, there's another important area, customer oversight. We need to know who's using these tools and what they're doing with them.
Like those know your customer rules they use in finance to prevent money laundering.
Exactly. This could mean screening users, keeping an eye on their activity, flagging anything that looks suspicious.
So we're trying to catch potential misuse before it turns into something dangerous.
Right. And it's not just about AI tools. It's about other things, too, like who's buying synthesized DNA, who's accessing certain research services.
Okay, we've got those safeguards, the customer oversight. Anything else?
The report talks about responsible research development. It's about making sure researchers are trained in biosafety and biosecurity. They need to understand the risks so they can make ethical choices about their work.
So it's not just about technology, it's about creating a culture of responsibility.
Exactly. Scientists need the knowledge to make good decisions, prioritize safety.
Like Spider-Man's uncle said, with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. And remember, biosecurity isn't just about human pathogens and toxins. We need to think about the risks to plants, animals, even the environment.
So the report focuses on threats to humans, but we can't forget about the rest of the world.
It's all connected. We need a big picture approach to biosecurity.
This has been a really deep dive. Literally, we've covered so much. Malicious actors, lab accidents, AI. It's a lot to take in.
It can be scary, but knowing about these things, that's the first step. Talking about it, that's how we start making things safer.
I totally agree. To our listeners, stay informed, keep asking questions, and be part of this conversation. Biosecurity, it's not just for scientists and policymakers. It affects all of us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some things to think about.
Until next time, stay curious.